Excited to be presenting a panel with the amazing Sasha Stiles as well as Michael. We're going to head right into it, so if you guys want to come up, please. Amazing. Yeah, we can do that. We can definitely do that. So how are we all doing? We all had a little bit of coffee? Everyone's feeling good? Yes. Yeah, it's been really amazing. We've had some really great speakers, and we have some people speaking in the back, right? We can have you guys join our conversation. Amazing, I love that. Okay, cool.
If they want, yes.
Exactly. So I thank you guys all for joining us for this session. Please take videos, photos. You can tag us as well. But we're really excited to, I'm really excited to be talking with these two. We're going to get into that in a second. But how amazing has the morning been? It was great, right? We've had so many great speakers, so many great topics, so many great things to talk about. And we're going to go into that right now. Well, I have the pleasure of introducing Sasha Stiles, and then we'll go to Michael. Sasha, could you tell us a little bit about yourself? And because I always like it when others, they sort of describe themselves. So could you
Sure.
give us a little background?
Hi, everyone. Thanks for being here. Hope you're all having a good Basel. And Justin, always lovely to chat with you. So hi, I'm Sasha. I'm a poet, I'm a language artist, and an AI researcher. And my practice really brings together poetry and technology. And I'm very, very interested in the role of the human voice in our increasingly, AI-driven age. So to me, I consider poetry both as a form of art. So part of my practice is sort of thinking through how language and image sort of intertwine in interesting ways. So thinking about text-based art and some of the ways that kind of bleeds into the world of advertising, folks like Jenny Holzer and Barbara Kruger and things like that. And then also on the other side, thinking about how poetry and technology sort of speak to and feed off of one another. And, to put that maybe into a little bit of context, I'm a lifelong poet and studied humanities, so it's maybe a little strange that I've come into the tech space, but I often think that poetry, in addition to being an art form, is actually a very sort of powerful and ancient technology of consciousness. Before we had written language, before we had other means of externalizing and archiving our human data, we invented poetic devices like meter and rhythm and rhyme and alliteration and assonance in order to enable us to save memories and to share them and transmit them, not just person to person, but through space and time. So I'm very interested in how I can use poetry as a lens to sort of think about some of the existential anxieties and uncertainties that our present moment of technological upheaval is raising. And I've been very fortunate to get to do that in collaboration with various brand partners and really wonderful strategists and institutional partners, and really sort of think together about how we can harness technology to bring poetry into new places and to sort of, really kind of celebrate its multimodal, multifaceted nature in this day and age.
I love that. And I've been following your work as well. And I want everyone to take a note, too, of that concept of poetry. How do you describe it as that memory? Like you're using poetry and these functions of poetry to really imprint into your mind.
Well, I think poetry is our first data storage system.
Exactly. Poetry is our first data storage system. So that's really lovely. Michael, please.
Just to add, words are very important. There is a meaning behind it, so it's fundamental. It's not just about words. So it's really what is the meaning outside that is gonna matter.
Yes, amazing. Michael, could you give us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, sure. I'm Michael, and I'm here. I have the pleasure to share the stage with Sasha, and you, Justin. With Sasha, we have worked in the past. Previously, I've been working for Gucci for 15 years. I've been the vice president of brand innovation, and we have been doing amazing projects together. And now I'm into another creative and strategy agency, leading projects into innovation, where technology is there, but also art. Where let's say I'm helping brands to go into uncharted territories, to create new meanings and new form of expressions. So new conversations, and actually, create relevant cultural anchor to talk about, what's memory, the senses, something that truly matters today, which is not just, putting two logos or, just we have this new bag or this new product to communicate. So let's pick an artist because they will create some art around. It's not, doesn't work like this. So I'm being, very hard on this when I was into a company saying that, we need to find that authentic connection that is not going to bring just value to the brand, but actually is creating a synergy, and it's creating what is going to be the buyout from others when they watch out the output of the collaboration. This is truly important. So happy to be again here to be able to tell more about it, what we did, but also, our vision.
Yeah, and I just want to note that too. I historically come from the advertising and marketing world, and to your point, I think for a long time, brands were really into, campaigns for a season. They were very much into almost art direction by artists. And I have something very provocative to say, and I believe that I don't know if every art director could be an artist, but I believe every artist could be an art director. So we may go into that a little bit later, but needless to say, what's really beautiful now is this collaboration. I think there's this shift, and we can maybe delve into that a little bit, is this much more about co-creation and collaboration on the upfront. So maybe you guys work together on a project, maybe you guys can share about that project, and how that came about. And maybe we start with Mikel and sort of how that was, because you work with brands, how that sort of came to be, and then how that was for you as an artist creator working with a brand.
Sure. To me, the sweet spot was the intersection between art and fashion, because fashion is a form of expression, art is a form of expression. So at the time, my challenge was to find those authentic initiatives that the feeling we wanted to provide was not just, again, another branded collaboration, as you just said, but something truly unique. So one platform that we did with Christie's back in the days was an art platform that empowered artists, actually. It wasn't something where, we commissioned art, using the visual codes of the brand and just, pull up a web page where, there is a gallery of images. It was actually something where artists were empowered to put their vision, and all artworks were on sale. So everything started a little bit like this with Sasha back in the days, because, the objectives from a brand perspective I was pushing is to position Gucci and the brand, into a space as a connector, as an empowerment of artists, and not just, a brand that takes, but actually that gives back. And so, starting with Sasha, the collaboration was, we started small, and then we suddenly went immediately big, because we with her, with the poetry and everything was so amazing. What she did for Gucci Ancora, which was the fashion show, and the poetry, the poem she created was actually emphasizing, was actually bringing that vision that was just about fashion into a new, different world, adding this new layer of conversation, this new layer of aesthetic meaning that actually increases the perception of the show. And then we created also synergies, because then the artwork was basically, with the permission of Sasha and the permission of the collector, was basically used for collateral activities and went all over the world. There were, customization on a lot of different branded items, like stores, activities, and was also awarded, not only that one, but actually the series that you created, because it's so truly meaningful. And maybe you can further take it from here and explain.
Yes, it was a really extraordinary experience getting to collaborate with you and the rest of the team at Gucci on that. Really, the invitation that I received from you was to sort of, Well, let me start by saying this. I think Gucci has been very forward thinking in terms of bringing together the conversation around craft and technology and thinking about how we can speak both to heritage and to innovation. And Gucci's also, has a very well-respected art program and a great love of art. And so you all sort of came to me with an invitation to bring my lens as a poet, as a language artist, and sort of create a little bit of an anthem for Gucci and Cora. And it was really a great fit because talking to you and the creative directors and the art team and all of that, it just became so apparent that there's such a deep love of design and craft and language and art. And it just really, drove home for me that for a lot of people, there are not these clear boundaries or distinctions between fashion and art and writing. Like, these are all aspects of a creative lifestyle. They're all elements of creative expression, and they kind of, they swirl together in really interesting ways. So we got to sort of, play with that idea and think about creating something that felt like it spoke to the soul of the brand, the future of the brand, and maybe sort of evoke, something a little unexpected, which is why an artist, comes into the mix, not to do what you expect, but to maybe bring a different layer to it. So that was really great. And, what was really fun was to sort of see that poetry and that art take up residence in very unexpected locations around the world, which is something that I love, something that I love here walking around Basel and, walking through the parcours and seeing art pop up everywhere. And I'm personally very interested in public art and kind of enabling encounters with art and with poetry sort of when you least expect it. So being able to, have this piece live on screens in Milan, in London, in Taichung, in Abu Dhabi, all around the world, and really come to life and sort of activate the locations was really meaningful. And for me, sort of made me think, well, it's a cool thing to be able to use technology to publish poetry in this way. Gucci, in a sense, became my poetry publisher because it was a brand new poem. It was a poem that, because it's multimedia and immersive, I couldn't send it off to, a magazine, literary journal. So instead, I got to publish it with Gucci. And when they posted it, on their social media to 52 million people, that was the most people I've ever had read any of my poems in my whole life.
Wow, yeah, can we get a round of applause for that?
I love those. Yeah. No, but indeed, what you just said about the ecosystem, because what we truly achieved to me was creating an additional ecosystem, and to this extent, when I was saying about it's not about just promoting a product. For that specific piece, there was no product. It was, just a poem on screens everywhere in the world. There was no logo. It wasn't, Gucci. It was just the poem because it was so truly connected and recognizable from a brand perspective that we didn't have to, mark again with an advertising. And that was, to me, something that was really interesting in the collaboration we did. Like, now I'm helping other brands, and always what I tell the others, that they always ask me, that's the product, that is what we need to sell. Yes, you're gonna sell, but you don't sell because you communicate the product. You need to sell something else. What's the meaning behind? What you want that the consumers or the fans are gonna take home as a memory of what you are as a brand and as a human being. And so now, for instance, when I select artists or when I do collaborate with artists, I always try to avoid being pushy, because I think that there should be a conversation between the creative director and the artist, so the magic happens. Otherwise, it feels too directive and it's just, too commercial. And then I'm not saying that it's not good. It's good as well, but depending on the objective that you would like to achieve for the collaboration, then you need to define your strategy.
I think you can also see this really amazing synergy as well. I think this is a really important thing too, that you have a client, you have an artist, you have, there's all these different pieces, and it feels like there's a lot of trust. There's a lot of trust in execution, there's a lot of trust in distribution. I do want to highlight that thing though, that about thinking about new ways of distribution as well. How you were seen with your poem in so many different ways now through that. Maybe real quick, we could go through, I got to experience the work actually in Linz Austria at Ars Electronica, which I arrived at the museum and I'm hearing a sound and it's this amazing poem. And I'm like, oh wow! Like the entry outside of a museum, it had like an overhang, so that you sort of were in like a cave, and then you walk in, and then I see your work there, and it's displayed in multiple different ways. Maybe you can describe how not only with the stores, but other ways in which it was distributed.
Yeah, I'd
Or
be
shared,
happy to do
rather.
that. That was really fun. We were at the Lentos Museum together, and it was a really great time. Well, that was a surprise. It was a really happy surprise because, as Michaela was saying before, we created this piece and kind of sent it off around the world, and it kind of took on a life of its own in a way. And we were really sort of shocked when it actually was shortlisted for the Ars Electronica Prize, and then it won an award, one of the first AI awards that Ars Electronica has ever given out, which was a really amazing honor. And so they invited me to come and install the poem at the Lentos Museum in the prize exhibition. And I wanted to put heads together again with the Gucci team and see, is there something we can do to take this poem and not just do the expected and kind of throw it up on a digital screen, but the whole point of this poem again was to sort of inhabit a space and to create a mood and to slow people down and maybe pull you in. So it became a very sort of multifaceted installation. As you said, it was sort of on the exterior and the interior of the museum. In one place, it was installed as a sound piece only. In the inside, we had a mix of, it was a hybrid installation of screens and printed pieces. We had posters and postcards to give away to visitors so they could take a piece of this poem home. And to me, that was really important because it goes back to this question of distribution and sort of this intersection of culture at large and poetry and art. I really wanted that installation to sort of invoke, in a way, the history of publication and distribution and sort of look at, the way that I feel technologies like blockchain and opportunities, like working with brands that have digital presences around the world, that to me is almost like our new version of the printing press. It's our sort of version of the moment when Gutenberg, revolutionized the way we distribute information, the way we tell stories, the way we share, aspects of our imagination. So being able to sort of nod to that through print, through digital, through oral tradition, through the soundtrack was sort of like a little walk through the history of language. And then, this look into the future to what I think of as the next epic in language, which is, the age of generativity. So it was kind of an arc, and it was really nice to get to do that together. And again, sort of thinking through how it ties together history, legacy, future thinking. It was a really sort of fun experience.
I still recall when you told me that you were, awarded for that, and I couldn't believe it. So imagine, myself going inside to explain that, one of the pieces were awarded. So there was an opportunity also at a museum, which from a brand perspective, it's basically what brands they aim for, to enter new audiences, to enter spaces they cannot, that are inaccessible because it's outside of their core perimeter. And to talk about the distribution, instead of just injecting the artwork into the stores and the digital screens, which in some we did, what was done at that time was to also change a little bit the perspective of stores. So what does it mean to have a store? Is it still a store like we know it, or do we call it places? And so if the stores become a place, for a place, you can enjoy. You have time as a KPI initially. You have people, as another. And so, for instance, there is Sloan in London, which is a store where, the store, it's a store, but it's more of a place because there is art all around the store, and you can enter the store and just walk into art, as well as, the poem of Sasha was displayed into a kind of hidden display, which was a display where you also with a headphone could also listen to the oral part of it, which was unexpected because it was into a place where you see that was a screen, but it was also maybe part of the visual display. You couldn't really catch it, and then that unexpected element of the the fact that you could interact with, so the participation of it is fundamental to me. And what I observed recently also, I was saying last time for Design Week in Milan this year, a lot of the brands, it's it's a fair, if you know, Design Week that started, of course, for design, and now everyone is jumping on board because it's a moment. It's a moment. So being a moment, how do you create a moment truly that matters for the brand? And what I observed this year is that all the brands, they've created experiences where people can actually go in and do something that is not strictly related to the product, but actually related to the core values of the brand. Like just to mention two, Vans did an immersive experience in collaboration with an artist where the product wasn't there. You actually entered this spaceship, and it was a 7-minute experience where there were lights, smokes. There was a little bit of everything. Loro Piana did a kind of experiential theater experience. You were asked to enter the space through a red curtain, and then you were magically transported into the story of the places you were visiting. Like imagine a living room with broken dishes, and there was a voice telling you what happened there. So it was a mix of you participate, you are part of the story, which is not just about storytelling, as a strategy, but actually to me, what I used to call it is story living, because you are into the story. Like you were talking about stories, we were all childs. We all remember stories from the past, why they resonate, because they created something into our minds which we connect emotionally. And that emotional bonding with art, with everything in life, it's what it matters.
And I think we've gone from very static things, and that's what digital creations and things that are created digitally, we have these now immersive things too. And not to say, you can also have new media and you can have installations. So there's all these ways of story living that I think is really important. And as you can see, these two really have. This was an amazing case study. One thing I want to point out too, because we do have a lot of artists and creators in here, as well as collectors. We have people from different practitioners doing different things, curators, etc. This piece also, when we think about authorship, this piece was also owned by a collector that was used. So we don't need numbers, but it's just as far as giving a framework, how indeed this piece is owned by the collector, it's used or licensed maybe, and then and again, we can very top line, nothing like specific, but just so people understand there are new models in which artists and practitioners are able to work with corporations. And I think sometimes these are things that aren't talked about. And I think that, again, there's these like sort of new models. So without going in the nitty gritty, just more of a high level, because this is very unique. It also encourages people to support and to collect. If I collect a piece and then it's used in a way that has this distribution, that has this way of spreading out, is really, really fascinating. And I think this is an amazing example of that.
Yeah, well, I mean, the collector has been a big sort of supporter of all this too. So yes, so actually that first moment together with Gucci was also a moment with Christie's, and it was part of a big sort of auction with Christie's, who has been an amazing champion of digital art as well. And so it found a collector through that sale, and because of the nature of this poem, it's been able to travel very quickly, very widely, without a lot of hassle. So it's just, sort of been a partnership with all of us, including Devang Thakar, who is the owner of the piece, and I think he has said to me he is very happy because the point of acquiring the piece wasn't just to kind of have it sit in his wallet. The point of acquiring it was to hopefully be able to share it and to to make sure that it is able to be read. The point of minting it on the blockchain was that so it was there, able to be visited and viewed by as many people as would like to read it. So that was my hope in creating it. That was my hope in minting it, and it's been really fun getting to work together with everyone to make sure that it does get to travel in the way that it was intended.
That element of the collector is important, as well as the, let's say, curators are extremely important. One project that I'm leading, with another brand, that is Boss, that has a partnership with Art Basel. We're driving forward, and there is going to be something more today. So stay tuned. It's that how do you expose art into your into a store, into a place. Either you buy all of them, or you partner and you ask, to collectors to be part of, whatever is the project that you are leading. And so when you draft the project internally for a brand, you need to really create the strategy, but also the conceptual layering and the connection for the reason why for the collector to be there, and the curatorial part of it. So having a curator that is helping the brand is actually important, and an asset that we have been when I was in Gucci, and also now it's extremely important as well, because it connects the dots, or also helps to amplify the voices of the different artists, and that's again something that really important when you work with artists.
I just wanted to jump off that too. I think, obviously we're talking about brands and partnerships, but I hope it's evident, like at the end of the day, at least for me, like I'm not thinking about this as a commercial opportunity, thinking about the commerce. I'm thinking about it as cultural exchange in a big way, and really thinking about the presence and the reach that these brands have in culture, and the way that we can sort of maybe recalibrate how we think about commerce, and the way that we can almost subvert or reappropriate some of these channels that they've created, in interesting ways, as many artists have done, over time. So I feel like, it is an interesting thing to sort of continue that tradition. But I wanted to say, I guess, two sort of related things. One is that, of course, we've been talking a lot about Gucci, but the most recent thing that we did together actually had nothing to do with the brand. It had to do with your students, and, working together and doing a little bit of workshopping and sort of thinking about how to talk about technology and art, again, outside of institutions, outside of museums and all that, but really sort of bring these ideas to different places. And so sometimes that happens in schools, and, sometimes that happens in boutiques, but for me, it's very important to get to do that. I think, I'm not interested in continuing to sort of show this work to the same folks who already know a lot about digital art. I think all of us want to continue to broaden the reach and the scope. And so this is, I think, very important to be continuing to branch out and building bridges, and, as you said before, amplifying this message. And the other thing I wanted to mention is I also had the great fortune of doing a really fun collaboration with Bang & Olufsen, which you know a lot about, and that was with Maker's Place and Jessica Marinaro. And the reason that made sense for me is because as a multimedia artist, as a spoken word artist, sometimes my canvas isn't a canvas. I mean, very often my canvas is a speaker, or an audio system, or I'm in front of a microphone. And so rather than going to Blick, I'll go to Bang & Olufsen and talk to them and figure out how I can use their equipment and do something really interesting. So I think that's also part of this for a lot of artists who are working with technology, is that we are using different canvases, different products, different platforms and tools. And so I think this can also be a really interesting way of continuing to broaden, the idea of what art is, what it can look like, what form it takes, how it behaves.
Just one thing to add, because I truly agree. I am fully aligned with that, especially on technology. And the mistake I always find on my way is that when you with people, when you talk about innovation, they immediately do a connection with technology, but it's not about technology. Technology is an enabler. Technology is an active, through technology, you activate something. You need to talk about what you activate. And that's what it is important then, and there is always this thing, this kind of thing that it triggers me, and I do have to explain all the time, to brands and partners that it's not about that, and actually you need to go beyond it and actually work on what you would like to express through it. We all pay with Apple Pay without talking about the underneath technology, which is the NFC, but we talk about the service, which is solving a problem of paying immediately.
So as you guys can see, the amazing case study of things to think about, new ways to think of things. I encourage you all to think differently about how you're thinking about your distribution, your story living. And I'm really thankful for what you guys have shared. Please do check out their social medias, what they're doing, their projects that they're doing. But can we get a round of applause for this great duo?
Thank you so much. This has been really fun.
Thank you.
And stay tuned for his announcement with Boss this afternoon. And as we know, she has some really amazing things coming up, as Ryan Zer talked about this morning. We're going to just transition, I think, right into Georg Bak and Adrian Wilson from Paintbox. Thank you guys all for staying. This is our last session of the day. Thank you, guys. Thank you. Actually, can we take a photo? Actually, yeah, Georg, is Georg here? Georg and Adrian? Okay, so we'll go into the last session right here since we had a little longer break. We have the Paintbox. Has everyone been to Space 25? How many have seen Space 25? Okay, cool. So in Space 25, there's an amazing installation of historical works by the Paintbox, artists from the past, as well as contemporary artists as well. I'd like to first introduce Georg Bak, who's one of the founders of ArtMeta and the Fair. This is the second version. Georg is amazing. I would call you an art historian. You can sit, Georg. He's an amazing, he has such an amazing wisdom and knowledge of art, traditional art, but also these emerging technologies. He's been a true champion of the Paintbox. We'll also bring up Adrian Wilson, who really was one of the, he's the earliest. He's an amazing artist. We had the pleasure of being together in New York and Paris. But you're going to hear a little bit about the Paintbox, and you're going to hear about their journey together. But these two men are doing really great things, not only for art history, but also the artist now. So without further ado, Adrian and Georg, please.
Thank you very much. We have no images to show because we want you to visit the exhibition afterwards, hopefully, if you haven't yet. I'm going to talk with Adrian, so I will ask the questions. And Adrian, maybe a quick overview who Adrian is. He's a photographer, but also a pioneer on the Paintbox. He was one of the OGs in the 1980s. 1984 was, I think, your first artwork made on the Paintbox, and I would say also the first photographer who worked on the Paintbox, who made picture manipulations on the Paintbox. And he's also a historian and archivist. So the exhibition that we see at Space 25 is mainly from his own collection or also from friends of his. He's been working on the history of the Paintbox, and Adrian and I, we met around 4 years ago or something, and we had this crazy idea to do a Paintbox exhibition, which is probably the largest exhibition ever made on this topic. We created a catalog, and it's a great pleasure for me to talk with you on stage today, and maybe to give also a little bit of context why on a corporate collection day we're talking about the Paintbox. The Paintbox, maybe you can tell us about why the Paintbox was developed and how corporations were actually working with the Paintbox, the relevance for like companies at the time.
Yeah, thanks for everyone for coming. This is me as a child, and this is me now, amazingly getting to tell this story that nobody knows, to reveal this magic story. So you all remember you'd be watching TV and you'd see a microphone kind of drop above and you go, oh, I can see a microphone. And there was always a magic to television where you never got to see sometimes they did have a TV show and show the production, the director with the old swipe thing. But generally, TV was a magic thing. You never saw the magic, how that was produced. And there was a company in England called Quantel, who basically were these English boffins, And they came up with the first live picture-in-picture and all this kind of little things where you could spin a video round, which seems, obvious now, but it was revolutionary at the time. And in 1980, they said, look, there's all these television graphic departments. They were sticking letters down. If you wanted to get a title on a TV, you literally got a piece of card, you got these sticky letters, put it on and said, whatever movie that's on tonight, then you would video it. And it took a long time. So they realized that, hey, now we've got this thing called a frame store where we can combine 2 frames. Why don't we try and do this digital painting system? From the first meeting where they tried to do one in the 70s and it wasn't good enough quality, from the first meeting where they worked out the solution to make this work, it was 10 months later that they launched this machine, which is just incredible. And it literally was like a spaceship compared to anything else. So they invented the first pressure-sensitive pen for a paint system. It had 16 million colors. It was 24-bit, real-time. I tell my kids it's real-time, and they're like, what does that even mean? There was nothing, if you remember back in the day, it's rendering was like a thing. And it was basically designed. I spoke to the guy who came up with the idea, and I said about the hardware and the software, and he said, Adrian, you don't think of a car as an engine and wheels. It's a car. It all works perfectly together, and actually what we realized is a car is nothing without a driver. So actually you literally, it's called driving a paint box. And how you drive, whether you're a racing driver or commuting to the shops or whatever, is how you want to drive that car. And they realized, if you go in this exhibition, you see all this work, and it's kind of weird because you don't realize there's one unifying factor from all this amazing stuff, and that's one computer. So they wanted it to be just user-friendly. You just picked up this pressure-sensitive pen, and it would be the equivalent of going in an artist studio and be given all the oil paints you needed and all the brushes, or going in a photo lab and you can do anything with your photo, or animation and graphics, etc. All in one machine, but it was $250,000. So you think, well, why wouldn't you buy a pencil instead of buying this $250,000 machine? NBC bought 12 paint boxes because they said, our designers can do better quality work, which means we can convey better information in a better visual style, and that means we get more viewers. That means we get more advertisers. So it's kind of funny because even though you go, okay, the paint box is hardware, software, and the artist, I always say that the paint box isn't really working unless it's making money. It was a business machine. Everyone talks about, the Mac when it started, etc. Well, you bought a Mac because you wanted to make money out of the Mac, right? So,
how many paint boxes were produced at the time, and who were using them actually at the time?
So everywhere in the world, it was so revolutionary. Everywhere in the world could afford one, bought one. And in fact, one of the demonstrators, they had 50 artists working for Quantel. And one of the demo artists, they sold one to Thailand. And at the time, Thailand had a military government. So, of course, the TV station is run by the military. And they arrived there to train the person on the paint box. And there was a guy with a uniform. And they said, we thought, seeing as though the paint box is so special, it should be a corporal that runs the paint box, because that seems the correct rank for the paint box rather than a private. And he said, well, is he creative? He said, no, but he's a corporal. So, this, and of course he did this work. But yeah, it was everywhere in the world. Maybe not Russia or China or, some of the places you were restricted to trade with at the time. But it was everything that you saw in the 80s and pretty much into the 90s. On TV, whether it was a Miami Vice title, everything that you saw was in video and actually in print that would be manipulated, was done on a paint box. But going back to that original thing, it's like your Google search engine now. All the data on you, you don't know where that data's held. You don't know the location, the color of the computer, who does the software. But it basically, everything that you see on the screen is a result of that machine. That was the same with the paint box. And in fact, it was funny that Tony Redhead, if you go to the show, we've got all these record covers and movie posters. And Tony Redhead set up this company called Electric Paint in California. And we were chatting today, and he said, which I kind of knew anyway, but for 5 years, there was specialist head swappers. So the classic thing with AI now, whatever, you go, you can just swap, Trump and Obama's head really easy. Well, this is what you could do with the Paintbox at the time. So there was a whole business where a celebrity would come and do a shoot for some magazine. The celebrity would be there for the 10 minutes, you take these pictures, and then you slotted it, you photographed all these other models in that same position, and then all the dresses and everything. So literally for 5 years, there was a guy who was a specialist head swapper. So and
actually the fake news was invented with the Paintbox, right?
Totally. So yeah, he was talking about Pretty Woman. He said, the funny thing is this whole thing about if you look at the Pretty Woman poster where it's Richard Gere and Julia Roberts, right, the classic thing, and everyone, he said it's really funny because everyone goes, look, they swapped, like they put Julia Roberts' head on somebody else's body. Like he said, we're doing that all the time, right? And he said the funny thing is they don't realize it's also not Richard Gere's body. All of it is just swapped around.
And there was also this, I think Donald Trump, there's like his fake...
yeah, there was an article in Practical Photography in 1991 where they're saying the cameras always lied. You did these in, the fairies at the end of the garden at Victorian times or whatever. So literally, so if you work for the New York Times or National Geographic, the reason why you're not allowed to digitally manipulate images is because in the 80s, because of the Paintbox, you could suddenly move things around. So obviously, ethically, you could do fake news, you could do all this kind of stuff. So you're not allowed to because of this new technology that came around. And as an example, they literally have a homeless person, or was it unhomed, that we have to say now? Anyway, a person on the street, and Donald Trump getting out of a helicopter, and they Photoshop it so the guy is lying next to Donald Trump, which is so prescient, really. But it's interesting because all these conversations about AI now, or even NFTs, hey, the image isn't here. Who owns the image? Where is it? Or, hey, what are the political or the implications of this fake news that we can now, put anything anywhere? Those were all done in the 80s and discussed in the 80s. And it's kind of funny hearing these same discussions now because we're all still here, even though Photoshop could do what AI can pretty much do now. So I would say the jump in Photoshop was if you wanted to swap heads before the Paintbox, you would get a pair of scissors and cut out something from a magazine and glue it and do it across. So the Paintbox meant that you just did it in 5 minutes or, well, less, 20 seconds on a computer. That jump now is the fact that you don't need any computer experience, you just press a prompt. But it's still the same pair of scissors moving a head around. It's just an easier version. So all those discussions are the same then as they are now.
Can you say something about Electric Paint, which was like a very successful company at the time, creating all these film posters and record covers? So what was the impact of the Paintbox for these companies to create all these new visuals?
Yeah, Tony, who's Australian, he was basically showing the Paintbox, the video Paintbox around. And of course, lots of people would say, hey, the resolution is only video resolution. It'd be great if we could really use all these techniques in print and for magazines, for adverts, for all this kind of stuff, and for movie posters, record covers, if you did a better quality version. So again, Quantel literally in a year came up with a photo quality version. And it's interesting, remember the 90s, people would come up with ideas, internet ideas, but they didn't work because the dial-up was so slow, or you couldn't pay for it because there was no PayPal. So some of these inventions, people say, well, why didn't they do a photo Paintbox earlier on? Well, the fact is the scanners, the professional scanning machines could only scan an image this small. So you had to stitch 10 images together to create that A4 magazine article because the scanner couldn't catch up with the Paintbox. So basically he moved to Hollywood and set up this company. And yeah, it was kind of funny because there was some point where obviously Photoshop came out in 1990. This is 86. You know, everything could be done before Photoshop. And when Photoshop came out, obviously people were looking at, it was obvious Photoshop 1 was terrible. But there was some point where Tony knew people from Apple and he knew people from Quantel. And Quantel was bigger than Apple at the time. And basically he said, you know, rather than Photoshop, why don't you just work together on this software and Apple's hardware and your software? So he got a meeting between somebody senior at Apple and somebody senior at Quantel. And Apple literally said, well, could you send us your source code? And Quantel said, no, we're bigger than you. You send us your source code. So there was this Mexican standoff of like, and obviously we know who the winner is. So yeah, it was kind of like a really bizarre thing because obviously we all know about Photoshop, but the New York Times, when AI became in Photoshop, the opening paragraph said, everyone knows that Photoshop is the granddaddy of digital manipulation. And I asked Paul Keller, who invented a Paintbox in '81, before Adobe even existed, what he thought. And he said, Adrian, you know what we did. The fact they don't know is kind of funny, really. So this whole exhibition is funny because I'm not trying to like tell you something that you go, oh, well, you know, I'm not trying to persuade you anything. Everyone who comes to the exhibition leaves and goes, hey, next time I see a Madonna video or I see Miami Vice titles, and I'd never even thought, hey, how did they do that? Like all the foundation of all the stuff. And when you go on the Paintbox, you go, hey, that's just like in Photoshop. And you go, well, yeah.
Can you actually recognize, I don't know, graphics that were made with the Paintbox? I mean, is there something like very recognizable about them?
Right, so there's two things. Firstly, April Greenman, if you know April Greenman, famous designer, when she first worked on a Mac, and she said the Mac is trying to emulate all the things that the Paintbox is trying to, that already does. So in 1983, Quantel were the first computer design company to go to all the typography foundries and say, look, we've ruined your business. There's no more Letraset, etc. But if you let us license an official font, we can sell that to our customers. You know, they pay $250,000 for a computer. They want the official type. It's NBC, it's BBC. They don't want fake fonts. So even though Chiron and all these companies and even Apple had all these, you know, Arial, we know that's a fake, Helvetica or whatever. Quantel, you could have 1,000 genuine fonts. So firstly, you were educated for good design. The same as watching, you know, home makeover shows. If you saw all these, even if it was a weather map or a what's on tonight or a traffic report, you suddenly saw good design, good quality design with the correct font. And you were like, oh, I like that, that's really good. The other thing is it had a color palette where you could mix all your colors. So of course, when you saw these primary colors and you've seen a print, you know, whatever, this color as a piece of cardboard, and then you see this amazing glowing color, of course you're going to say, I want that glowing color. So if you see Miami Vice's titles, that's 2 colors on the palette, the main colors. So it literally changed everything we saw, whether it's hip hop videos or whatever. They used all these colors because they were so bright. So it changed the whole aesthetic. But again, I go back to that show. Whether it's contemporary artists that we got on, you look at that and it's the artist, it's not the computer. In the user guide, it says the same as walking in an art studio. Because we give you oil paint and brushes, it doesn't make you an artist. That you can get, you know, whatever you want to do, the computer will help you do it. But it's not going to make you an artist, and it's not going to look computery. And that's what's the amazing thing, to see the world's biggest collection of all this stuff together, is to like realize, wow, this is about the people and the artists, not the machine. And I know this is the last talk, sorry, Georg, but whatever talk you came to see in the last 3 days, I can guarantee that the stories that were the best stories were about the humans involved, whether it was the anecdotes, somebody decided something. And even though this is all about tech, it's about tech that does something really nice because humans get a hold of it and do something interesting with it.
And how did you actually get into the Paintbox? I mean, you were also one of the very early Paintbox users and artists.
So the issue with it was that obviously it was $250,000. It was like a Formula One car or whatever. You didn't get access to it unless you knew somebody at the BBC or whatever. So Quantel realized that, and they donated 3 paint boxes to 9 different art colleges in the UK, and just said, hey, you know, do whatever you want with it. And so one arrived at my photography college at 1984. And it was interesting, literally, and you can imagine all the photography lecturers said, well, this is just a gimmick, which it kind of was in some ways. And all the other students were like shooting with 10x8 transparencies and saw that it was just video quality and said, well, yeah, Adrian, look at it's just fuzzy, it has these lines across it. You know, it's terrible. Whereas for my personality, I had ideas in my head that I couldn't even do in the darkroom. And so suddenly it was like, wow, but I have an idea and I can now get it onto paper or get it onto a screen, which is what every artist tries to find, the medium where they want to transfer their thoughts into something that's shared with other people, right? So this did it for me. And somebody said, well, yeah, but what about the resolution? And I said, if you go to a museum or a gallery and you see a painting, and you remember the frame around the painting, the chances are it's a crap painting. So if this is a good idea, you won't care the medium. You don't go and see an oil painting and say, well, there's kind of 10 strokes of his palette knife instead of 30. That's like terrible resolution, you know. So a good idea is always better than a good technique, so a good technology. So I didn't really care. And the good thing was, nobody else was doing it. So everything you did, you were just enjoying. It was kind of hard because you had no inspiration, i.e. there wasn't anyone to look at and go, hey, this is the way you should do it, or this is the way I don't want to do it, or whatever. I was kind of in this wilderness and in Manchester, so away from everything. But that was kind of good as well because I just did my own thing, really.
It's actually, I mean, you're saying that there were 3 paint boxes in the UK for artists, basically. It's kind of similar as you know, these early computer artists who had to go to universities or big companies like Bell Laboratories or Olivetti, who had these large mainframe computers and started to create their first computer art in the 1960s. So that must have been a similar situation. So there was this very few paint boxes that you could use. You probably had to figure out how to use it, right?
Yeah.
So I mean, how would you describe this whole art scene? That, I mean, how did artists react to this opportunity, or was there something like an art scene?
Well, firstly, we didn't have the internet. We had a library. That was it, or a magazine that came out. So the only way you knew what somebody was doing is you read about it in print. So you were kind of isolated. I was in an exhibition in 1988, and you'd meet in these various things. But the fact is, it was a business machine. So what you would do is befriend somebody who worked in a post-production studio and a TV studio, and you would say, hey, let's go to the pub. When the client's finished doing a TV commercial, we'll come in at midnight. So Justin, for instance, I remember when I first met Justin, and he said, I'm researching all these 90s graphics that are done projecting onto video screens during the rave culture. And I said, and I don't mean to embarrass you here, but it's just an example of, it's just an unawareness. So I said, well, you mean like the TV screens, the video walls that were at Studio 54 or wherever, where somebody who works at MTV goes there, a video jockey, and at night they do video effects for the discos. And he was like, what? Because he wasn't there, he's too young, right? So, and it's nothing wrong with not knowing, but that's the cool thing. Like this is there's Roberto Matta, I think, had a really nice phrase. So Roberto Matta went on the Paintbox in 84, 85. He did a thing called Metamorphosis. And he was a conventional painter and he's going into digital. And he said, to me, a real piece of art is like a conventional piece of art, is like a slice of sausage. You've got this thing and it's a moment and it's finished. But he said a digital piece is the whole sausage. Where it starts, where you can carry on. It's never completed. You can go back to that file 10 years later and add to it and change around. And it's the whole sausage. And I kind of like this idea that digital is this thing that isn't just a normal conventional piece of art. Is like a photo. It's a moment in time when that artist says, right, it's finished. But digital just goes on forever, right?
Yeah, I mean, talking about digital artwork, I mean, nowadays we have different ways, to market digital artwork. So we have NFTs, we have other mediums that you can trade. But how about we see these artworks by David Hockney and Howard Hodgkin that are slides, and I mean that's a. Can you say something about how these artworks, how is the reception of these artworks when there was no market, and how were they saved, preserved?
Yeah, this is a sad thing because it was a video computer. Literally, you got an input and an output, and the output could go to 1-inch tape, VHS, or live broadcast or whatever. And because it was TV, I combined the three least respected parts of the fine art world: digital art, photography, and Photoshop. So nobody cared what I was doing. People always ask me, "Did you make much money being a digital artist in the '80s?" And I said, "Yeah, I was paid $500 an hour to do a TV commercial, but nobody wanted to buy my personal work. Why would they? They don't know about the Paintbox. There was no market for digital art back then." So it was interesting because, again, you say there were things around that you had to do. So if you imagine when NASA went to Mars, the Mars rover, and we all saw in the 80s, oh, here's the first pictures from Mars. And I said to people, well, how do you think you got those pictures? Oh, well, they were beamed back to NASA. And I'm like, and then what? How did they share that with your TV station or with National Geographic? And they're like, I don't know. So there was a machine called a film recorder that literally would get any kind of data from an electron microscope for a hospital, from NASA, from a video thing, and it could convert that signal into a black and white screen, and then there'd be a red, green, and blue filter, and you could convert it into a slide. So I've had discussions with various people where they're like, well, this slide isn't. So I found the Keith Haring's original art that he did in 1989. And I spoke to the Keith Haring Foundation. They said, do you have the original file? And I said, yeah, I have a Betacam tape. And they went, no, the original file. And I'm like, it's the Betacam tape, yeah. So they're like, yeah, but that's not the original zeros and ones, floppy or whatever. And I'm like, but this is a video computer. You didn't save it to a floppy. One image of one frame was on an 8-inch floppy. So you're not going to save the whole thing. So there's this whole discussion, and they were like, well, that's a reproduction. And I said, well, when you look at a monitor of your laptop, that's a reproduction. That's not a real image. It's a reproduction of zeros and ones. And again, there's a great discussion in France about who owns a digital image. When it was finished, they said, well, we can't take anything home unless the computer lets us take something home. It's like Bossy, like it owns the image. And so we get to see it and we get to take something back, but we've always got to go back to the computer and say, excuse me, can we have something that's yours? We're creating it on you, but you own this image, which is an interesting philosophical point as well, right? So which is exactly the same now, people will, in the old days, they would say, well, this isn't real art because it's digital or whatever. And they'll say, well, this isn't a real file because it's not the floppy or it's not whatever. But this was the format things were output on. So you'll see, if you go to the show, and I recommend it, obviously, those slides, output slides from Larry Rivers, from all these people, they've never been seen in 40 years. I went to the Hockney Foundation with all the slides, and they haven't got a copy of these things. They'd never seen them. And they said, you know, could you donate them to the foundation? I was like, why? But I said, I'll let you scan them. And it's kind of funny because they say, and I don't mean to, this isn't like any criticism of the Hockney Foundation, but they've got to work with these things. They know a painting. If they have a painting and they reproduce that painting in a print run, it's done in their studio, that they print it out, they stamp it. So that's called an official edition, right? Well, they can't do that because they don't have a paint box. They don't have a matrix film recorder. So it was always output for a slide. So it's kind of funny because they call these reproductions, but they said, oh, can we have scans that we want to scan for my archive? And I didn't say anything, but I'm like, so you want reproductions of my reproductions?
It's kind of difficult to say what is exactly the artwork. Also, you know, I mean, in the exhibition we have, I mean, for example, your artworks, they exist as large prints, but then there's also these slides, right? I mean,
yeah.
So an artwork comes with the slide. So what would you say is actually the original? Is it the slide or the print or?
Well, I think ultimately, as I said before, an artist thinks his work is complete when he stops and he goes, right, I'm happy with this. And then there's obviously, if you're in different media, you start with, hey, I'm going to paint this canvas that's 3 by 2 feet or 2 by 1 feet or whatever. So you choose a size and a format, but then you've got to frame it, etc. Where's it going to go? How's it going to be hanged with this lighting on it? So I think this idea of what is a piece of art is kind of fluid anyway, and everyone's fixated on what is the original thing, especially in the digital art world. Oh, can we trace it to the zeros and ones? Nobody asks like David Hockney, when they look at his painting, can we see the original brush? And was this done in, you know, Winsor and Newton paint, or was this done in this? But because it's technology, everyone's going, well, what software was it? And have you got the disc and whatever? And it's like, it's the final piece, right? It's like this, and yeah, the slide looks freaking awesome, and this is the best way we're going to do it, and that's how I want to share it with people. So that's the artist choosing at this moment with this technology, and how I want it shared with the world is this way. So surely that's the original, the way the artist wants to present it, not that the way that the technology determines it can be, right? That's a good answer, right?
Yeah, very good. I don't know, do we have still time? Or?
I know, I think we're going to wrap it up, but no, I think the original is what the intention of the artist is. This is where,
Exactly.
Yeah. So, and I think that's a very important part is we're thinking about artists creating digitally, putting that intention of what that is. If you do have specifics, because you're not limited to the size of a canvas or how much paint you have access to. These images can be scaled in different ways. So you as the artist, putting that intention, I think, is like really important.
There was a guy yesterday, and it's nice because all these people connect with these things. Oh, I remember going on a date when I saw this movie poster. So this person was working on the paint box, and this guy just wandered in, like randomly, and we were talking about the Keith Haring. He said, oh, well, I knew Keith Haring. Like, he was a friend of the family, and he would bring me sneakers. We had this TV station. So from 4 till 10, I knew him. And he said, oh, there's a picture on the phone of me and Keith as a 10-year-old boy. And I said, well, you know, he went, you know, for 3 days in Rome just to paint a paint box, work on a paint box before he died. So I said, I'll tell you what, I'll put this image of that little kid on the paint box. And he's an artist. And he then spent an hour doing this art over it. And he was crying, literally crying. Now, nobody, I don't care who you are, nobody cares what pixel size that original is. Nobody cares whatever. This was like emotion. This was his, it wasn't even, it was just a, you know, a moment in history. And that's the other thing, you know, some people make art, other people make art history, right? This is a whole section of art history that everyone knows about, 60s, 70s, plotter art or whatever. Then it jumps suddenly to the 90s, and just think, all of you, hey, what happened in that time in between? And what happened was the paint box.
Well, with that, let's thank the Paintbox. Thank you, Georg. Thank you, Adrian.
Thank you.
This was really enlightful. I encourage you all to check out the exhibit if you haven't. If you've already have, please check it out again, because I think this has brought new insights. I want to thank them both. Thank you again, Georg, for your championing this fair, this project. It's the second year. The guests that we had today, the panelists, were extraordinary. We had, if you weren't here earlier, we had Ryan Zur from One of One, doing amazing things with artists, collaborating with institutions, as well as artists to create works, especially in the digital space. We had a great, amazing panel with Hyundai and BMW and the bank as well, but looking at ways in which brands and companies are not just patrons, but they're participating with the artists and creators in not just their campaigns, but getting visibility, getting value or aligned value, as well as venture investment. And as Thomas Gersh talked about, Ed Ruscha talking about, if an artwork is good, sometimes we look at an artwork like, or we're, ah. So we want to have more of those moments. So I encourage you all to have those today as well. And then we went into that amazing session with a lot of great artists that are really circling around and how this digital space can really create impact. So it was brilliant. And then I was so honored to have Sasha Stiles and Mikkel from working with the different fashion brands and thinking about new ways of distribution. And I encourage you all to think about these new ways in which your creativity can not only be spread through social media, but other canvases, like Sasha Stiles talked about the speaker, where the sound comes out, is her canvas as well. So I'm Justin Gilani. For those of you that I didn't get to meet earlier, because you weren't here early in the session, I'm based out of Riyadh from Los Angeles, collecting in the space, curating in the space, connecting in the space, but really creating bridges as sort of a cultural architect, I like to say. So if you have any questions, please see me after. Please look at the program today, follow those. Everyone's doing amazing projects. Thank you, Adrian. Thank you, Tezos and AR Chip as well as Design Boom for being a media sponsor, and Diane and all the rest at ArtMeta for putting this together. Thank you so much. Have a great day, and we'll see you soon.